It's 6 o'clock in the morning. What am I doing awake at 6 o'clock in the morning? Excellent question. Listen to this. Nature's alarm clock. The dawn chorus of an influx of birds who have spent all winter in places far warmer than New England. It's spring, and they're returning in what is probably the most hotly anticipated birding event of the year. Spring migration. Can you feel it? It's here, spring migration season. And with spring migration comes birds. Lots of them. For the first time in my life, I'm spending the spring in New England, which means I'm smack in the middle of the Atlantic flyway, prime birding grounds. Birds use flyways like cars use highways. Oh my god, I'm actually so good at rhyming. They're large routes where lots of birds can quickly get to where they need to go. In the case of most migratory bird species, that's their northern breeding ground after they've spent all winter in Central and South America. There are 4 major flyways that cover most of North America, so if you live on the same continent as me, you're pretty sure to have some really cool birds coming to your area very soon, if they're not there right now. This year, I want to make the most of spring migration season, so I'm exploring the community science project eBird. eBird is an app / website / a massive community science project developed by the one and only Cornell Lab of Ornithology. Whether you're an experienced pro or you're just now putting together that ornithology means the study of birds, there is somewhere in this project for you to explore, grow, and contribute meaningful data to real scientific causes. First step, download the app. While I do that, feel free to like this video and subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. With summer coming up and school letting out, I'm going to have lots more time to produce regular content that I promise you won't want to miss. So hit the notification bell and share or do whatever it is that you do to get the word out. That science is cool and something you can and probably should do. Okay, app is downloaded. I'm ready to jump in. But before I begin, I need to answer a few questions like, what? Where? Why? And how? As in, what do I need to do? And where do I need to go? And how do I do this? And why am I doing this? To help answer these questions, I sat down with Dr. Jenna Curtis, a project leader at eBird, to see what insights she could provide me with.
I'm Jenna Curtis. I'm one of the project leaders at eBird. I've been interested in birds almost my whole life, and as I grew more experienced with learning to identify birds, I wanted to keep track of the birds that I was seeing. A lot of people start with pen and paper lists or journals of their birding activity, and for me, by the time I was experienced enough to be keeping lists of birds, eBird was there for me to use as my primary listing resource.
But how did you begin birding? What was the impetus there?
It goes way back to when I was in 8th grade. I was homesick from school, and just while sitting on the couch, I looked outside the window and saw the most amazing bird I had ever seen. It was a junco, which is quite a common bird. Juncos are all over the United States. They're a very common backyard bird, but for me at that time, it was the most beautiful and interesting bird I had ever seen. I just needed to see them again. And so I convinced my parents to get a bird feeder and then another bird feeder and another bird feeder so that I could attract not only juncos, but all the other local birds to our yard. And that was kind of my gateway into birding.
I also zipped over to the Harvard University Museum of Comparative Zoology, where Dr. Scott Edwards is a professor of zoology and the curator of ornithology, to conduct iSci's first in-person interview.
My name is Scott Edwards, and I'm an ornithologist, evolutionary biologist, and yeah, I've studied birds since I was an undergrad, really. And it's a great thing to teach as well. I think students really enjoy learning about birds. And my work has focused on the passerine birds, which is about half of all birds. This big group includes a lot of the familiar species, crows, robins, chickadees. But I've also studied seabirds, albatrosses, and shearwaters and things like that.
Is eBird a program that you use?
Yes, I do use eBird, especially on special birding trips or trips that I really want to remember. I'll use eBird to record my observations.
We know that large numbers of birds are traveling long distances, coming to my literal backyard, waking me up early. But I still wonder, why now? Why are all these migratory birds here? I mean, I see birds all the time. Why are these birds so special?
Well, I have to say, New England in spring it's hard to beat. With all the deciduous trees in New England, they're coming out in leaf, and then the birds following it. It's just magical. I mean, spending a morning in Mount Auburn Cemetery in mid-May is just, it's an unforgettable experience. And so the combination of all the colors from the birds coming from South America and Central America is just, it's really magical.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more about like the colors that you mentioned.
Yeah.
When you think of spring migration, what birds specifically come to mind, and why are they so colorful in the spring?
I think everyone would agree that the wood warblers, family Perlidae, are the sort of pinnacle of spring migration. And yes, they're very colorful. I mean, things like the magnolia warbler with this amazing yellow breast and this black striping on it, or you might have the Canada warbler, has this really neat eye ring, but also this necklace of black stripes. Blackbirdian warblers, incredible orange, bay-breasted warblers. The list goes on. They're probably colorful for reasons of sexual selection. In other words, those colors are helping advertise the quality of males, and it might help them to get a mate and to pass on their genes to the next generation. Of course, there's lots of other things that are of interest. The tanagers, blackbirds, thrushes.
The winter months are cold, quiet, not a ton of bird activity. And then all of a sudden spring arrives, and all of the birds that are going to be breeding and raising families in your area are returning. They're starting to sing and set up territories, and all of a sudden the mornings are just alive with the choruses of birds. It's great to see birds that you haven't seen for a couple months, the migrants that are coming back and arriving in your area. The first time of the year you see a tanager or a warbler that you haven't seen, it's like, welcome back, you're beautiful, and you're a sight for sore eyes.
Just being like privy to like the natural cycles, and it's an exciting, you feel really connected to something bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So it really does sound like if there's any time to get into birding, it is now. Many birds are at their brightest, they're most colorful, they're most vocal. I mean, birding during other times of the year is good too, but birding in the spring is great. And you want to be good or you want to be great? All joking aside, before we achieve birding greatness, we need to know how to prepare, what to bring.
Do you have any like insider tips, tricks, or like knowledge that you would give to a first-time birder? Say they've never picked up a pair of binoculars in their life. What do you tell them? What's your like go-to advice?
Well, I tell them to get a field guide. It could be one on your phone. It could be a paper book. Yeah, and then, aside from that, it's really all about doing a lot of listening. Birding, most birding, I would say, is actually listening for stuff. Of course, seeing the birds is the most fun part, but as your skill in identifying them by ear increases, hearing them is as much fun, I would say. Yeah.
There are plenty of free, high-quality digital field guide apps that you can download directly to your phone. The Audubon Society has one, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has one. If you want to go old school, you could purchase a paper book. Basically. Now, when we've looked at other ecological community science projects like iNaturalist, you make one observation per organism that you've seen. eBird is a little different. Instead of submitting observations one by one, you make a checklist of all the birds you've seen out in the field and submit it all at once afterwards.
One thing that really stands out about eBird is the checklist system. Would you be able to explain a little bit about the rationale behind the checklist system?
Yeah, listing has a long history in the birding community. For as long as people have been birding, they have been keeping lists of those birds. eBird is kind of built on this legacy of keeping checklists. It's more or less a very familiar behavior for people who have been birding a while to want to write down all the birds that you've been seeing. And folks who are familiar with keeping lists may notice that eBird collects additional data that might not be something you would normally log as part of a list. Things like distance and duration, or how many people were in your group, or an exact map location. And those details help our scientists understand bird populations, actually how many birds might be in that area. And so people start eBirding for the first time, they wonder, well, why do you need to know how far I travel? That's the science aspect of eBird. It makes an eBird checklist more similar to the sort of list that a professional ornithologist or biologist might keep in the field.
I have hundreds of lists scattered in notebooks from the pre-eBird era. But I've birded on pretty much every continent, and I have no idea how long my life list is. It's maybe a couple thousand, I would imagine. I certainly haven't seen as many birds as sort of professional birders.
I don't know, a couple thousand seems like a pretty significant number to me.
Well, I mean, there's 700 or so species in the U.S. I certainly have not seen all of them. But then you add another, 300 from Australia, another 300 from Europe, and also in South America. So, but probably not over 3,000. That's, I think, even though there's 10,000 species of birds, to get over 3,000 is, I imagine it's a huge amount of work.
Yeah, I'd say. I mean, getting to my first 100 species was a feat, which is just to say that you probably shouldn't compare your birding successes or progress to anyone else. As a great American poet once said, it's the climb. Yeah. My climb has brought me to a place where I've downloaded my field guide. I know what birds I might see. Now I just need to know where to actually go birding.
What to you makes for a good location to go birding?
A good location to go birding? I would say a good location to go birding is one that has lots of different habitats. And so if you have some water there, like in a marsh or in a river, that's always going to bring a different suite of birds. It depends a lot on the time of year as well. I think in New England, in the springtime, a good patch of woodland is enough to satisfy me. There's going to be a lot of great spring migrants and stuff like that.
So I began by thinking about all the places nearby that might be good for birding. Places with environmental diversity, water, tree coverage. And as I was thinking, I remembered something that Scott Edwards said.
Spending a morning in Mount Auburn Cemetery in mid-May is just, it's an unforgettable experience.
Well, I guess I have to go there. And so to try out eBird, I got outside, took a short bus ride, and ended up in Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts. Let's check it out.
So I just arrived at Mount Auburn Cemetery. I'm sure you can tell. Now's as good a time as any to begin my checklist. So I'm gonna open the eBird app and get birding. In between the tombstones, there's a lot of American robins darting in and out, looking for insects and little worms to eat. Let's see, I can count how many I see here. 1, 2, 3, at least 4. So I can add those to my list. I guess to bird here, you have to be kind of okay with being constantly surrounded by memento mori, reminders of death. There is a lot of habitat diversity here, just like Scott said there would be. There's like all these grassy spots in between the tombstones. There's lots of tree cover, a lot of diversity in trees too, which is important. I can tell because this place is also a certified arboretum, so they have all of their trees labeled here. I can show you. Right here we have trident maple, Acer bergeranium. I'm hanging out right next to this little ephemeral pool. It's basically a big puddle. I can't imagine this is here year round. I saw a close relative of the American robin in the same family, Turdidae, except it was a lot more brown and streaky on the breast. It wasn't like red or rusty. It was a hermit thrush I saw really quickly. It was on the path, jumping across. Oftentimes when you're birding, you'll be able to hear a bird. You'll be able to hear a bird far before you can see a bird, if you ever get to see it at all. And if you're like me and you don't have a super great ear for bird calls, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology has another app that you can use to help you. It's kind of like a Shazam, but for bird songs. It's called Merlin Bird ID. It's a free app. All you have to do is open it and let it record the bird songs, and it'll tell you what it is. They have nest boxes set up right next to the water for what I assume would be tree swallows, which are an insectivorous bird that nests around water. They'll fly and skim over the water, hunting insects midair, which is really cool. So they have this really choppy, erratic flight, kind of like bats, if a bat was a bird. Oh, there's a male northern cardinal right in front of me, right on the path, bright red, super recognizable. Its scientific name is really easy to remember because it's Cardinalis cardinalis. So nice you have to say twice. Ah. I'm looking up into the tops of trees to look for warblers because a lot of them like to live up in the canopy, and they're so small, they're really hard to see sometimes. There's this colloquialism in the birding community, warbler neck, which is like the crick in your neck you get from like looking straight up into the canopies, trying to find this like 1 to 2 inch long bird. You're probably getting actually a great view of the inside of my nose right now. So I learned about this cemetery because Scott Edwards recommended it to me. But if you don't have a world-class ornithologist on hand to recommend best birding spots for you, eBird's got you covered. On their website, they have a Hotspot Locator that shows you where lots of different types of birds are being seen. You can look for individual species, or if you want to see where the greatest number of species have been seen in your area, you can do that. So it's a great resource to figure out what places in your neighborhood are great for birding. This place is so massive, it feels like you get lost in it. It feels like you're in a whole other world, but if you look, you can see the Boston skyline from pretty much any location. We're not that far out of the city. I mean, this is just a short bus ride away from me. Which is to say that no matter where you live, if you're in the middle of nowhere, if you are in like the center of a city, there are going to be great places for you to be birding. There's a song sparrow on the path right in front of me. I'm really not good with bird calls, but song sparrows are one that I'm like beginning to learn because they have 4 very distinct parts to their song. I could not imitate it for you because that would be a hot mess, but I'll play one. And I will be adding that to my checklist. Going on the list. Here's the red-winged blackbird. You can also use eBird to tell you when and where interesting birds have been found. Like, because of eBird, I know that a couple of days ago, a juvenile white ibis was found in this pond, which we're pretty far out of the range of white ibises, but juveniles sometimes don't know where they're going, they get lost, so it makes sense that if one were to be found here, it would be a juvenile. I'm not seeing it right now, but I'll keep an eye out. I don't know if you can see it. There's a tiny palm warbler. It's in the shadow of that branch of that tree. My first warbler. The palm warbler is actually one of the easier warblers to see because it likes foraging on the ground instead of high up in trees. Although it's just as colorful. It's a bright yellow breast, like a rusty brown cap on top of its head. I'm not going to be able to get good video, but I'll show you like stock footage because I don't want to deprive you of the palm warbler. Okay, so I just basically made one big loop. Now I'm back at the beginning. I'm gonna do one last thing before I head out. I'm gonna submit my checklist. So I'm just gonna do whatever in the app, click like done, whatever, submit, and then that data is like handed over to the scientists. And let's go home. I'm actually ready for lunch.
That was a really fun day, but I want to know what happens next because I'm pretty confident that isn't the end of the story for all the data I collected.
So say I go birding and I make an eBird checklist. What then happens with that data?
So every checklist that gets submitted to eBird first goes through a data quality process. Anything that doesn't get flagged right away is incorporated into the scientific database. And then those flagged observations also get included after evaluation. The eBird scientific database is an amazing thing. It powers so many research and conservation and education applications around the world. Everything from high school student science fair projects to governments and agencies that are working on energy developments, new construction projects, and want to understand the environmental impacts of these large-scale infrastructure developments. eBird data has been used to develop legal policies and legislature and a million other things besides. So by submitting checklists to eBird, you are contributing to this fantastic resource for folks who are working with bird data around the world.
That's exciting that you don't even have to be a career scientist to access this data to answer your questions. The idea of using this for school projects should just sate your own curiosity is really exciting to me.
Right, and I want to emphasize that you don't even have to be a great birder to use eBird. If you know the birds around you, if you're a backyard birder and you know the birds in your backyard, you can be an eBirder too. You can submit those checklists. Those are so valuable as well. And I know that some people think, well, I'm just seeing the same common birds over and over again. Does eBird need that data? And that's an emphatic yes, we do need that data. The more information we have about when and where birds occur and how many are in your area, the better understanding we have of bird populations throughout the year and what their habitat needs are and where they go and how many there are and whether or not their populations are declining. And so even if you're just submitting common birds, that is making a difference. I will admit that there are times when if I'm out of my league, I don't worry about identifying every single bird around me. It's enough to just try to do your best, but don't stress out about the fact that you may not be nailing every identification. You don't need to be able to identify every bird around you in order to eBird. We just ask that you report the birds that you can confidently identify.
No matter what your skill level, eBird is a place for you to record birds for yourself and for career scientists. But eBird is not just a place where you record birds for yourself and career scientists. There's a whole worldwide community of birders who use the platform to connect, share, and learn from each other. And the community isn't just online either. They're out and about doing what they do best, birding. Out on my birdwatching trip to the cemetery, there were a lot of birders out and about who were so warm and welcoming, giving me tips and tricks, telling me where they saw an owl a few days ago. So there's really a lot of special connections to be made there.
I think birding can definitely reach beyond cultural boundaries, and it's sort of like a global community, because you may land in a country where you don't know anyone, and yet if you can find a local birding group, that immediately there's this common bond, and and also I think it's really, really nice to learn from locals. In other words, there's a pretty big sort of residue of colonialism in the way the Americans or Europeans explore the world and whatnot. But if we can actually learn from locals who know their birds better than a foreigner would, that's really nice. And it might be in the form of ecotourism, or it might be in the form of just getting in contact with a local bird group.
And I do, when I'm on eBird, seeing what people have posted in my neighborhood or on the other side of the world, I do feel that sense of belonging to a global community. One where I have the opportunity to learn from anyone and everyone. But the question still remains, what has eBird learned from us?
What have we learned from eBird data?
I think the coolest example of this is the eBird status and trends resource. Basically, our science team is able to take eBird data and, based on the bird observations of members of the public, create incredibly detailed continental scale maps of bird distribution and abundance at a resolution that we have never been able to accomplish before. And so for each week of the year, you can watch these statistical models predict where birds are going to be, in what abundance, where they're going, and you can just track migrations and populations throughout their annual cycle in just stunning detail.
Often birds are monitored in incredible detail, probably more than any other animal group, and so we know a lot about how climate change and other kinds of global changes are influencing their populations.
And that is now being used by, for example, shorebird conservation teams around North America and South America, who are using these models to identify areas of high shorebird concentration that would be important for conservation action or protection, so that these shorebirds have habitats that can support them while they're migrating.
It is wild to me that birding that I do in my backyard in my neighborhood can contribute to global bird conservation efforts. I feel like as environmentally conscious people, there's this kind of perpetual societal question of what more can I do? How can I help? So if the answer to those big questions is birding, sign me up.
We still have very, very basic questions like, where are birds? How many birds are in this area? For a lot of the areas of the world, we may feel like we filled in those gaps, but there's always room to grow. There's always more data to collect.
So no matter who you are, where you are, or what birds you observe, you can be assured that by participating in community science, by contributing to eBird, you are making a difference by helping to answer these fundamental questions.
Why do you specifically enjoy birding?
For me, it's that connection with nature, that feeling of watching a bird go about its life and its connection to the world around it makes me also feel connected to the world around me. Even a common bird is probably doing something interesting. Just the opportunity to see birds going about their lives and the things and the behaviors that they do, I find so fascinating.
And I agree. By connecting to birds, I feel connected to the natural cycles and the beauty of the world. And the more I feel connected to the world, the more I think I understand my place in it. In conclusion, birding, it's fun, it's accessible, it's educational, it's healthy, and it can directly and genuinely benefit conservation efforts and our scientific understanding of global ecology. It might be the answer. As always, iScience, you science, anyone can do science. Was that an eastern kingbird? Yeah, I wore a bird shirt for the bird episode. I don't think that's overdoing it.